Welcome, everybody. My name is Framji Minwalla. I'll be the moderator for this session. I would like to begin by introducing the panelists for this session, the Begum, which will focus on the launch of a book, but actually the book is not published yet in Pakistan. It will be published by OUP. It has been published in India. And it is a biography, a tribute biography to Begum Rana Liaquat Ali Khan. The two authors, one of whom is here with us, Deepa Agarwal, who is in India and was unable to make the trip, and Tahmina Aziz Ayub, who is sitting on my right. Poonam, as she is affectionately known, was schooled in Karachi, Islamabad, and Rome, and has a postgraduate degree in social anthropology from the University of Sussex. On her return to Pakistan, she focused on the field of gender and development, working with several national and international NGOs and the UN in the struggle for human rights and women's empowerment. Her interests include yoga and trekking, and she has made the arduous trek to Mount Kailash. Married to a diplomat, she has lived in New York, Rome, Cairo, and The Hague. She currently lives in Islamabad with her husband and her son, Shehryar. To her right is Rana Liaquat Ali Khan. Rana earned her BA in Business Administration and spent most of her life in the corporate world. She also happens to be the granddaughter of Begum Rana Liaquat Ali Khan. And to her right is Javid Ali Khan. He's the son of Liaquat Ali Khan's younger brother, Nawabzada Sadakat Ali Khan. He did his MA in English from Karachi University and then an MA Honours in English from Cambridge. Today, he is taught at Karachi University. He's taught students quite famous in Pakistan students like Javid Jabbar, Irfan Hussain, Anwar Maqsood. Took his lateral entrant exam for the Foreign Office and was posted to Karachi as director of the Foreign Office during Begum Sahiba's time as the governor. So he had considerable interaction with her when she was the governor. He resigned when General Zia took office and left the country. He currently lives in the UK. His articles have appeared in the Friday Times, where he has written considerably about Begum Sahiba and the work she did in Pakistan. So thank you, panelists, for being here. I would like to turn it over to Rana first, who would like to read something from the book about Begum Sahiba.
An introduction. Begum Rana Liaquat Ali Khan was the wife of Pakistan's first Prime Minister. She was born Irene Margaret Punt in Kumaon in the early 20th century. A generation earlier, her family had converted to Christianity, and Irene grew up in the shadow of the Brahmin community's still active outrage. Always intelligent, outgoing, and independent, she was teaching economics in a Delhi college when she met the dashing Nawabzada Liaquat Ali Khan, a rising politician in the Muslim League and an ardent champion of the cause for Pakistan. She was immediately inspired by both the man and the idea. They married in 1933, and Irene Punt became Rana Liaquat Ali Khan. In August 1947, they left for Pakistan, led by Liaquat's mentor and friend, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Rana threw herself into the work of nation building, but in 1951, Liaquat Ali Khan was assassinated, and the reasons for his murder are still shrouded in mystery. Rana continued to be active in public life, and her contribution to women's empowerment in Pakistan is felt to this day. Rana's story embodies all the major tropes of the Indian subcontinent's recent history. Three religions, Hinduism, Christianity, and Islam, had an immense impact on her life, and she participated actively in all the major movements of her time: the freedom struggle, the Pakistani movement, and the fight for women's empowerment. She could see clearly what went wrong after 1947 and wasn't afraid to say so. She spoke out openly against the rise of religious conservatism in Pakistan and the growing role of corruption. She occasionally met with opposition, but she never gave up. It is this spirit that the Begum captures.
It's important to note that the biography itself is more a tribute than a political biography, and these kinds of biographies, I think, are really important because they give voice to women who have been largely erased from Pakistani history or are spoken of anecdotally, but not in any grounded, researched, historically grounded and well-researched way. So this book is a welcome addition to the canon of literature that includes biographies of important nation-building women in Pakistan, and in the sense that it's a tribute, but it does actually pay considerable attention to the work that Begum Sahiba did, the work that she was fiercely the work she fiercely advocated for, especially for women's equality and women's empowerment. As most people know, she was the founder of the All Pakistan Women's Association, APWA, which is still functioning today and still does important work in rural areas and urban areas in the country. I'll turn it over to the author of the Pakistan section of the book, Poonam, to talk a little bit about the research and the work that went into actually producing the biography.
So I'll start, of course, by picking up from where you left off, to say that there's very little written about such women, and Begum Rana being an example. I think there are 2 biographies written about her, and the last one was written as long ago as 1983 by one of her colleagues in the APWA. And the first one was written by her secretary, who came with her from India in 1947, and that was Miss Billy Miles, K. Miles, and she wrote a book called Dynamo in Silk about her. Very short little thing, but just sketchy. And similarly, the other book was more about APWA and its workings and so on. So this was a book that I think needed to be written at some point. And sadly, it was conceived not by anybody here, but by somebody in India. And that particular lady is, she heads the Jaipur Literature Festival herself, so she's a very busy person. She said, when she met me in Bhutan about 3 years ago, and she said, I have this dream, I have to write this book. And she came from where I came from. And she was a Pant Brahmin like I was, but then they branched off into Christianity. And I've heard about her all my life. And the fact that she went to Pakistan and how she served that country without a second thought or ever looking back to where she went from. So I wanted to pay a tribute to her, but I never got the time. So I've got somebody from Kumaon who can trace her life from her childhood and her youth. I want somebody in Pakistan to be able to write about her post-47 contribution to the country. So she asked me to get on board, and I did. And I'm afraid there was, as you said, research. When you mentioned research, there really wasn't very little. There was very little secondary data. Speeches mainly, some publications of her speeches were there, some articles in magazines, and the families, members who are still alive. And some of whom don't really remember much because they were much, much younger. And I didn't come across Javid at that time. I don't know where you were hiding. So I ended up with Akbar Liaquat, who's the younger son, who really was not well, and he wasn't very articulate and a bit reticent about somebody writing about her in India rather than Pakistan. So I said, there's 2 of us. And believe me, this is a homage. And we are going to say nothing which will upset the family. So later on, when somebody, very recently in London, there's a self-exiled Pakistani author, I won't name her, people might know who she is, but she wrote a review on this book. She bought it from the Kindle, from outside. And she said, you know, it's a great book, but it gives one the color of a hagiography, which is like somebody writing about a saint who had nothing wrong with her, you know. I wish it were a bit more, maybe not more critical, but a little more analyzed. So I had to tell her, I had to say that, look, this is a personal tribute, and we have tried to sidestep too many political allusions, even though they may have existed, you know, some controversies. So anyway, as I said, Namita had this book written. She very kindly also had it launched in Jaipur amidst all this anti-Pakistan furor, and it was very well received because people didn't know about her. And the fact that she went from India and her background, and how much she sacrificed even in India, and how much she sacrificed in Pakistan after she came here. So yeah, I will let Javid say something now about the period that he knows, and I'll come back to whatever I have to say a little bit more.
Well, thank you, Poonam. I wanted to read out some of the speeches you have very nicely produced in your book, reproduced in your book, so that from that, Rana can speak about her services to the women of Pakistan. Actually, her life was taken away from her in 51. Everything she had was taken away by the death of her husband, Liaquat Ali Khan. Any other woman would have become bitter and given up. But no, she put herself into social service, into trying and developing the deprived women and building them up, because she realized that women are 50% of a country's assets if you make them assets. And if you leave them in the home and suppress them, then they become a liability. And she always wanted to develop these women. That's why she founded APWA, and at the UN in December 1978, she was given the UN Award for Human Rights because of the work she did for women. And there, in her acceptance speech, she said, APWA will continue to struggle through the next decade and the next until one day the Pakistani woman shall emerge from her shackles, economic, social, and political, and face a future over which no shadows appear to obstruct her path towards her maximum development. If we had followed on that path, and if we had followed on this policy, the state of Pakistan would have been much better today. But Poonam has asked me to speak about the time when she was governor. Again, there was not a hint of bitterness about her. She loved Pakistan. She loved working for Pakistan and Pakistani people. She was a dignified, sophisticated lady, 5 foot tall but very high in stature, so much so that even Mr. Bhutto was in awe of her. And I can relate an incident to that effect. As the director of the Foreign Office, I had to receive all the international dignitaries who came to Pakistan or were in transit to China. Mr. Bhutto was trying to be very, very friendly with China, so anybody going to China, I had to give him the VVIP treatment. The president of Togo, a French-speaking small republic in Africa, was on his way to China. I received him. The flight came in at about 11:12. He was supposed to depart. Just before the departure, the Chinese consul general came rushing in, and there was a hullabaloo. We found out that they had got their timings wrong. They were 1 day early, and they were not supposed to be in China till the day after. So, what to do now? I rang up the Prime Minister's military secretary and said, inform him we've got this situation on our hands. In the meantime, I asked them, what would you like to do? They said, oh, we are the guests of your government. We are going to spend the night here, all 62 of them. So the military secretary came back and said, the Prime Minister has said, put up the president and his wife in the governor's house and make arrangements for the rest of them. They are all our guests and they are all state guests. So I asked him, who's going to tell the governor at 12 o'clock in the night? He said, you are. That's what the Prime Minister said. So I had to wake her up. She was an old lady at the time in her late 70s. She used to go to bed early. I got her servants to wake her up. She came on the phone very grumpy. What is it? I said, the Prime Minister wants you to please put up these, President of the Togo and his wife. She said, what does the Prime Minister think? The governor's house is a bed and breakfast lodging? But, of course, she was very, very good. By the time we got to the governor's house, she was standing there on the top of the stairs with her walking stick, resplendent in her satin garara and kameez, which was her signal dress, and she was the best of hosts. The next day when Mr. Bhutto came down to meet the president, he called me. Okay, was she very mad? I said, more than you can think. So, but you are safe. Sara gussa mere par utar gaya. Kange shukar khuda ka. So, again, with Mr. Bhutto, I could see that he would stand away from her, full of respect, hands like this. She was a lady with a great personality. All the consul generals who came to Karachi would ring me up that we want to go and meet the governor. They didn't know she was my aunt. And on the way, when I was taking them to meet her, I had to be present at the meetings. I would ask them, why especially do you want to do? Oh, she's an international lady. She's an inspiration. And even the consul generals who were in Karachi would like to meet her again and again. They enjoyed her conversation. They enjoyed what she has to tell them about the freedom movement, how they worked for Pakistan, and how they actually managed to get Pakistan. So a lady with a great personality, very sophisticated, very dignified, but there was the mother in her. She was warm also. Her military secretary from the Navy became a very good friend of mine. I knew him slightly because he was married to the sister of another friend of mine. And she would inquire about them, about their children. If the child was sick, she would say, you go. You don't have to be here. Go and look after your child. And both her ADC and the military secretary told me, we see our mother in her. So there was that side of her also. And there was this very strict professional side when she was governor. No one could take any liberties. Everything had to be perfect. On the banquet, she would come herself to make sure everything was laid out correctly and absolutely correct, perfect. She liked things to be in order and total professional, dignified, but the mother also in her, the warmth also in her. That is what I found there. And I got this very lovely chance of 3 years to interact with her. She would keep me back when the consul general had gone and said, come and have coffee with me, let's talk. So I'm grateful for those 3 years.
The citation, the United Nations Secretary General's citation at the award ceremony for the Human Rights Award reads, there are few humanitarian causes on behalf of a nation and indeed on behalf of humanity that do not know the inspiration stemming from her participation and leadership. A noted educator, a distinguished representative of her country who is known and admired throughout the world. And indeed, she was an educator and an inspiration to many. But Rana, I would like to ask you, what kind of inspiration was she to you?
Well, she was definitely an inspiration for all of us. I mean, in her time and age, she had a master's degree in economics and sociology from Lucknow University. So she was very well educated. She was very witty. She could speak very well. And on top of all that, she had started this APWA, which is the All Pakistan Women's Association. And all we ever knew was Dadi Amma and the APWA ladies. They were always over at her house. They were never sort of indulging in any gossip and backbiting. They were always talking about APWA, how they could make APWA better, how they could have a further reach in Pakistan with APWA at the grassroots level. And that she did actually achieve all that in her lifetime, because she passed away in 1990, and APWA was formed, I believe, in 49? Yes, 48. So she did manage, they started women's education. They started the first home economics universities, colleges around Pakistan, first Karachi, then Lahore, Dhaka. They had the schools, they had the, the industrial homes. also adult literacy for women, and they provided them, provided these women finance to buy, like if it was a sewing machine or some such thing, which is later on the microfinance, but it was already being done. Well, she did have a master's in economics after all, so she knew what she was doing. And she really had a vision for the women of this country. She wanted to help the women who were not able to help themselves, actually, to empower them with, of course, education and perhaps their own economic independence.
The origins of APWA are really in the rehabilitation work that I think she did with the refugees in 1947. And she was put in charge of actually rehabilitating, training nurses, training teachers, especially for the camps. And she herself went, visited the camps, gave her help unstintingly to the people in the camps, children, especially children and women. Is that right? Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about that work?
Actually, yes, of course, that was the period that was where women were needed the most because they had to come forward. And she had a lot of problems bringing women out to become volunteers and help her. And there was a lot of opposition from families, who said, why should women step out? And she said, look, I mean, there's no way that they cannot, because there's a health emergency, there's epidemics of all kinds, there's hunger, there's homelessness, and we need every hand that's available. So she actually moved to Lahore for almost 2 or 3 months in the beginning, in August 47, and just made a camp office there, because that's where all the refugees were pouring in, rather than in Karachi.
Yes, in fact, I'll just add there that it used to be very embarrassing because she and Begum Jahanara Shahnawaz used to go and sit outside the offices of the government waiting for funds to be released, and they would say, Madam, Prime Minister's wife, you cannot be sitting here on these wooden benches. And she said, we will not move till we get the funds to help the refugees.
That's true. Begum Jahanara Shahnawaz actually talked about this in her own autobiography and described how she was fully in partnership with her in all these efforts at the refugee camps. And then they formed something called the Women's Volunteer Service, which was then they began to train women in first aid and nursing and basic, stuff that they needed to do. And so there was a large band of volunteers. And later on, I think she even started the actual formal nursing training. And she started a nursing college for women. And then it became a respectable kind of employment for young girls. Previously, there was, it was a shunned area of employment for middle class families to send their girls into. So anyhow, I mean, she was very much in the forefront of all the refugee rehabilitation work. And then, of course, she went on to form the APWA, which became a larger platform. And she got together women from all the 4 provinces to come and become part of the first 100 women, so to speak. And I feel that it was really the forerunner for all later feminist women movements in Pakistan. It was a very primary movement. And she was the inspiration for all other later such movements like the Women's Action Forum. And in fact, she was very actively supporting them and helping them when they got formed because she was still alive. So I think she was inspiration for them,
Yes,
that's
true.
She was the first one to support the Women's Action Forum, which started in here.
And,
she sent them a letter of support and all. As long as they were functioning, she was giving them full support.
And this was Ziaul Haq's time.
Morally, that's all she could do at that time.
And also, Ziaul Haq's time was in any case very repressive for women, and she just stepped back as far as any official position was concerned. So she gave up her governorship. She said, I will not be able to do this, sorry, but I can do everything else. So she found a great opening in WAF when they set up the organization. She came forward. But the other contribution which I somehow think people tend to maybe forget, which was in 1962 when Ayub Khan was still very much in power, and there was this whole question of the very retrogressive Islamic laws vis-a-vis women, marriage, divorce, etc. India is still grappling with its with their Islamic laws vis-a-vis triple talaq. And Mr. Modi is trying to revoke that now for Muslim women. But when I told them in Jaipur that in 1962, Begum Liaquat Ali Khan prevailed upon Ayub Khan to institute the it's called the ordinance, which is the Family Ordinance 1962, in which they revoked the triple talaq provision. And it's mandatory now for a husband to take permission from his first wife, and there's a 3-month mandatory period before the divorce comes into effect. So they were all like with open mouths, they didn't believe it, that we actually had this law. How it's used is a different matter, but at least we have it on the, on the cards. So that was really something that people had forgotten about, her contribution.
But there are really some striking details in the book that I was surprised by, and that really happily surprised by. She was the only female royal guest to be invited from a Muslim country to the coronation of Elizabeth II. She was appointed by the armed forces as a brigadier, overseeing the Women's National Guard and the Women's Naval Reserve. She was the first woman ambassador from Pakistan to a number of nations across Europe and nowhere in Asia, right? I think only in Europe, yeah. So there are anecdotal accounts and documented accounts of her work that she did while she was both an ambassador for Pakistan, the work that she did, the sort of diplomatic work she did even in informal capacities when she went on trips like to the coronation of Elizabeth II. And really the book is a treasure trove of information and really interesting information. And I think this is where critical biographies critical biography will find information and important accounts in this book to then build on. So that would be the next stage and the next step. This is the, right?
If I may interrupt, Framji, she was ambassador in Netherlands and Rome. And because of her social welfare work in those countries, she was given the highest award that they have, in both countries, both in Holland and in Rome. I forget what they are called, but Rana may remember.
Rana, yesterday when we were talking, you said that, from your recollections of Governor's House and then the house in Bath Island, everything was Apwa, Apwa, Apwa. So could you talk a little bit about the work at Apwa and, the importance of the work at Apwa and the challenges that your grandmother faced in the process of, doing that work?
Before Rana starts, I just want to say that Apwa House in Karachi, the headquarters were set up in 1954 or 55, and they're still there. And it's a beautiful building which she got together. And we are now going to, after the Karachi Literature Festival, the Apwa is going to have a big launch of this book in their hall. And since it's March 8, we're going to have a very big Women's Day celebration. And in my book, there's a poem written by the lady who wrote the biography in 1983, Meher Masroor, and the poem, we're going to have a dance recital on this poem about Begum Sahiba. So that's just Apwa still has very much her on their radar. They haven't lost her at all.
Poonam, one quotation of hers which I really like was at the convocation of the Karachi University address in 1954.
74.
And when she said,
74.
when you educate a boy, you educate an individual who will benefit himself. But when you educate a girl, you educate and benefit the whole family.
It's one of our famous beliefs. Quoted very often. Yeah.
Yes, very much so. Yes, actually, growing up, I was 27 when she passed away, so I knew her quite well, very well, I would say. And this was all they would do all the time. I would call them the Apwa ladies, all her other Begums, because she did not do all this alone. She had all the other Begums from every distinguished family in Pakistan helping her. And they tirelessly and effortlessly not just gave financial help, they also gave their own personal help.
Lands.
And they gave their lands. So many properties were donated to Appa. All the lands actually were donated, and they were all donated by the families that owned them, which were the initial 22 families, we would say, of Pakistan, or whatever. Anyways, they were always tirelessly working. And I think they really achieved a lot. These Begums, they were all called Begums in silk, running around doing all this social work. And they treated it sort of like a corporate job. That's the amount of time and effort they put into it. It wasn't just a casual cup of coffee. They were literally working from morning to night.
And did she imagine the spread of APWA nationwide, or did she, I mean, her work initially focused in Sindh, if I remember right. But what was her ambition for APWA?
No, she always wanted it to be nationwide. It wasn't just going to be for Karachi or Sindh, because it was to empower all the women of Pakistan, each and every one of them, especially the northern areas. She and Liaquat Ali Khan visited Swat at the request of the ruler there, the Wali, and even he was very helpful. So no, it was definitely for the entire country. It was not just for any one province.
APWA, 1956. They opened a school for girls and an adult literary center in Quetta,
Yes.
and the Quetta Industrial Home. So that answers your question. And a large-scale adult literacy program focused mainly on rural women and small towns. So it was nationwide.
Yes. Yeah, she had branches, district branches everywhere.
Yes.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about her legacy, perhaps, Poonam, Rana, and Javid Sahab? Legacy.
Well, just before our program, there was the program previous to this, was also on a very great lady who left us last year, Asma Jahangir. And what Asma Jahangir believed in and what she tried to do for oppressed people, for deprived women, I think that is a continuation of her legacy, because Begum Liaquat Ali Khan started off doing that and wanted it to continue. So in a way, her legacy is continuing, if not under her name, but in other people's name and efforts. But the name is not important. The important thing is that this work should continue. Women must be empowered. Bangladesh separated from us 25 years back and is now way ahead of us, economically, socially, politically. And that was because there, they made women financially independent and free. And that has given the whole nation a boost. We have gone the other way after Zia.
Yes.
Now, for example, her vision of what the Pakistani woman should be. I have a quotation here. When she said, "I believe very sincerely that women should take active interest and part in public life, but within the spheres of their own specific interests, capabilities, and limitations, not to the detriment of their homes and families or their own intrinsic, but according to their own intrinsic strength and finer qualities as women." This was her vision for the Pakistani woman. And I think Asma's legacy is trying to achieve this. And if we are successful, then 50% of our population becomes an asset. Otherwise, it remains a liability. Rana?
Rana, her legacy?
Well, yes, this is exactly what Uncle Javid was saying, and this is, I think her legacy is there. She wanted women to be educated, and she wanted women to be empowered. And I think she succeeded that, because if you look over the years from 1948 till today, APWA has educated so many girls, and all those girls must be in the millions by now. And surely they have come out and are taking part in society and working. Like you even said, nurses, nursing was not a tradition in Pakistan before. In the subcontinent, when it was India, it was all basically Christians and Hindus who were in the nursing field. So how would the country get ahead if we didn't have any nurses, etc.? So her legacy is already continuing in the fact that, well, not as many women are out as in Bangladesh, but plenty are out. If it weren't for the APWA ladies, maybe there would be none out at all.
Okay, so actually, yeah, all this is from the Pakistan period, but her legacy goes way back actually. And she was a very young, dynamic, sprightly girl who would cycle to her college in Lucknow and was probably the only girl in her class of economics, and often found her cycle punctured when she came back because the boys resented her to come there and study. So, of course, she did all of that, and then she continued to teach, and then she met Liaquat Ali Khan, and she became like a partner to his mission to forward the rights and the causes of the Muslims in India. At that time, they didn't realize it would lead to the next stage, which is formation of Pakistan. But in the early 30s, Mr. Jinnah had actually left India and gone off to do his law practice in London. He was annoyed about something with Mr. Gandhi. This couple had gone on their honeymoon in 1933 to London. And they went to visit him, and they said, look, Muslim League is an orphan without you. You have to come back. And she said, I was, quite enamored of him, and I piped in and said, look, I promise I'll get all the women out for you on this, whatever help you need. So, yes, then he said, he looked at them and said, okay, I think I trust you. And you both just go back and tell me if things are ready, and I shall come. And Liaquat Ali Khan toured the whole country, up and down, all the Muslim League branches, and he told him, look, yes, you are needed, you have to be back. So he was back. So they became like a big team, and they lived in this very beautiful palatial house in Delhi, which is now the residence of the Pakistani ambassador in Delhi. And it belonged to them. It belonged to Rana, Liaquat Ali Khan, because he named it after her and named it to her. So that became like a headquarters for the Muslim League. People all over, papers all over, khana all over, and Begum Sahaba actually was like the secretary, because they couldn't afford to even hire secretarial help. So she was typing away and running letters out and all kinds of things. So yes, her legacy began then, when she became a partner to the Muslim League cause and movement, and then Pakistan was formed in 47. She came, and when she began to draw women out and met with opposition for the refugee camps and the women's volunteer service, a lot of bad press, right-wing press. Her husband then stood up in forums and said, listen, what are you criticizing her for? Is she taking women to some frivolous activities, some dance halls? She's trying to get her to work for the welfare of the refugees who have come with not even a strip of clothing on their back. So please don't do this to her. You're damaging your own cause of the country. And then, of course, APWA was formed, as we all spoke about, and then she became almost like a role model of all that she propagated, because when she went to America in 1952 with Mr. Liaquat Ali Khan, with Sahibzada Liaquat Ali Khan, she was like an embodiment of all that she spoke. So people were really impressed and said, my God, what dynamism in a Pakistani woman. Yes. And even though she was very demurely dressed and everything, but the way she spoke, the way she inspired people. And yes, you are right that even then she would talk about this balance that a woman must be aware of between home and outside, because she was a very devoted mother and loved being with her children and so on and so forth. So she did say that don't forget that you are also a mother and a homemaker when you go out and work for other causes.
Poonam, I think that's when the US named her Mother of Pakistan.
Yes. Yes, actually they did.
The media and
yes,
the press.
They named her Mother of Pakistan, and that is what the title of my part of the book is, Mother of Pakistan, Madre Pakistan. And the first part is picked up from the Dynamo in Silk, which the first biography, which her secretary wrote, the British secretary. So the Indian ladies called her the Himalayan Dynamo, because she came from the Himalayan belt of India, Kumaon. It was in UP, it was called, it was near Nainital. That's where she was born and brought up. So Himalayan Dynamo. But you're right, she was called Mother of Pakistan, because I think Miss Fatma Jinnah was called Madre Millat. Yes. So she was called Madre Pakistan. That was her title. So
I had a chance once when she and I were sitting together having coffee about this trip to get Mr. Jinnah back. I don't know why historians try and paint it in different things. Liaquat didn't have anything to do with it. The fact is, she told me that one of his missions when he went there, he had gone for some conference, was to try and convince Mr. Jinnah to come back.
That's right.
And he said, I was very young, I didn't know very much about politics. This is 1933, she had just been married. So he said Liaquat used all his political and reasons and, backed it up with his barristry skill and lawyer skill in trying to convince Mr. Jinnah. And I tried to help him. I used all my charm.
She did do that. Actually, yes. I mean, she may have been inspired by him, but he was fairly inspired by her, actually, because there's a little thing where I've quoted in my book, where during the leisure times when they were working for the Muslim League cause, they would play bridge in the evenings. And one day, Mr. Liaquat Khan plucked up the courage to ask him why he doesn't marry again. After all, look, I'm married again. I was not happy in my first marriage. Of course, in your case, your wife died. So why don't you marry again? So he said, find me another Rana and I shall do it. So she was very flattered.
There is, at the end of the book, there is in one of the appendices an interview with Begum Sahiba, which is incredibly forthright in her political views and in her opposition to certain aspects
Afshin Zubair.
Yeah, Afshin Zubair's interview. I'm not sure when it was published.
1984.
1984. And I just wanted to read one of the sections from the interview, which I think is telling of her political views and also of her forthrightness. So one of the questions was, how do you feel about the proposed law of Qisas and Diyat? I don't know much about theology and all that, but common sense tells one that this religion is so liberal, so universal, and then you pick one or two things which are not at all important and bring it up and say, this is Islam. Islam from the very beginning thought well of women. What about Hazrat Khadija? This goes back to the Prophet's time, so I don't know with what face they can come up with all this now and how our people are demoralized. They are putting a nail in the coffin of women's rights, and what can women do except unite? If half of us are going to be brought over and toe the line, then I'm afraid there's no salvation. We, APWA, have expressed strong objection to Section 10b of the proposed law, in which the evidence of women is excluded. There is no basis in the Holy Quran or Sunnah for the excluding the evidence of women for Hadd. APWA and 8 other women's organizations have also filed a Shariat petition against the 4 Hudud ordinances where the evidence of women have been excluded in cases of Hadd punishment. The petitions are pending before the Federal Shariat Court. It is also deplorable that the basic and fundamental right of women to equal diyat has not been accepted. So it's not that she was not politically forthright, it's not right. And the interview is actually really quite telling about her political views. How do you visualize the future of Pakistan? Very bleak. I don't see any change for the better. We're going down and down. I only hope it remains one nation. I don't see any political leader either acceptable to all the provinces, but the talk going on now, questioning the very basis of Pakistan, is not helpful at all. It just creates more bitterness. People like us should feel why we created Pakistan, but we don't question the basis, not at all. It was the thing to do then to create Pakistan, provided it was carried on and really made an example of what Islam and how it should be practiced in a modern polity by being generous and kind to minorities. Why is everybody running away from here? They're fed up of what's happening. Young people don't even know enough about the country or about their leaders and their qualities.
1984.
So I think, Begum Sahiba, really, I would urge you when the book is published to buy the biography.
Yeah, because actually this interview, I came across it, and then I found that we should not make our book overtly political. So I suggested to our editors to put it as an appendix, but to use it because it's a very important interview. So that's why it's there. So it's not in the book, but it's part of the book, the back.
And the foreword, which is by Namita
Gokhale.
And the afterword, which is by Leila Sarfraz, both place Begum Sahiba's work in a political and a national and a local communal context. So, it really is... Huh?
Actually, the book is about to be published. I have to clarify here that the Indian edition came out a month ago, just in time for JLF. 100 copies came out, digital print. And then somehow they agreed to give the rights to Oxford University Press in Karachi. So that's happened, and now it's about to be printed there in time for launch at the Karachi Literature Festival. And then it'll be openly available as a paperback, cheaply priced, so everybody can read it. So,
we have approximately 15 minutes left, so I'd like to open it to the audience. Yes, ma'am. Do we have mics?
Bachos.
There's one coming down.
It's not quite a question. My name is Shazia Rafi, and I represent APWA at the UN in New York. And I've been doing it since, off and on since '88. But there were two things about her vision of APWA, which she was very strong about till just a few years before she died. One was that it should be linked immediately to the international UN framework. So APWA got a UN accreditation in 1951 to ECOSOC and still maintains that, which very few women's organizations from the country had access to. And the second was that she was very strong on believing that women who were working for APWA had to volunteer their time, that it not become what she called the new trend of, NGOs that are hiring professionals and are paid, even when it ran into serious issues, because that was really the way of the future. She was one who insisted that the organization be manned, for want of a better word, by people who were volunteering their time.
Yes, that's true. I mean, there were many chapters for APWA, like you're saying, and nice to meet you. They had Friends of APWA, which they had a chapter in London and New York, I believe. Yes, you have as well, yes. And Friends of APWA does all fundraising,
Canada.
Toronto as well. Yeah. And they do, I think, practically all the fundraising nowadays. Yes, everything is on a volunteer basis, absolutely. Yes, that's what I was saying, that these women worked as hard as people work in multinationals these days, and they weren't even getting any compensation for that.
Other questions or comments? Right there.
Assalamu alaikum ji. You mentioned Madre Millet Miss Fatima Jinnah, and I would like to ask what Rana Sahiba's relationship was, how it was like, their relationship. Some historians paint it as a very frosty relationship, but all evidence points otherwise. Like they might have had issues, personal differences, but they worked together for the making of this country. And in pictures, you always see them together, dressed identically in the gharara and sort of, etc. And did Rana Sahiba also support Ms. Jinnah's campaign for the restoration of democracy in the 60s?
Okay. You've asked a very, very thorny question. Because this is a question that a lot of people have airbrushed and put it under the carpet.
Correct.
Okay? And I decided to be devil's advocate and bring it out from under the carpet. I don't know whether I've done the right thing or not. But there was because Mr. Jinnah, as you know, died within a year, right? Just before that, an incident occurred in which Mr. Liaquat Ali Khan had to put in a resignation letter to Mr. Jinnah, and it had to do with the two ladies having had misunderstandings. And Mr. Jinnah was given the wrong version, so he was very trite and curt with Begum Sahiba, and she was very hurt. She told her husband, I'm not going to continue with this anymore, and you can do what you like. He said, no, if you're not with me, I'm resigning too. So he put in a letter, and I've published it in my book. The letter's there. And then Mr. Jinnah called him and said, look, we have been friends for 1920, God knows when, and you can't do this to me now. Just when we've made Pakistan, let these two ladies fight. And we both have to continue to be friends and companions, and you're my right hand. I can't do without you. So that resignation letter was taken back. Much later, of course, when he passed away, there was always this thought that, oh, she might feel insecure, unwelcome, she might go back. But for her, there was no turning back or no looking back. Then came Ayub Khan's period.
Yes.
In the 60s, when Ayub Khan started his basic Democrats, and then he wanted to be elected. So he thought, I'll have no opposition. And suddenly, Ms. Jinnah stood up and became an opponent.
Yes.
So he thought, now what do I do? So he turned to Begum Sahiba. She was at that time ambassador in Italy. Italy, 62.
You're right.
And he said, look, can you come to my rallies? And can you tell this lady what she's all about and what is she up to? And she loves to create mischief. And Begum Sahiba said, I'm sorry. I mean, you don't realize I am an employee of the government of Pakistan. And I can't take sides for anybody. Even if it's you,
Yes.
you are fighting elections as you know, in a democratic election, if you want to, go ahead. It's not my style or my way to come and stand on the platform with you and put Miss Jinnah down.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that might have cost her
Ambassadorship.
her ambassadorship
He
in
was
Italy.
absolutely miffed.
He was very angry.
He
And when he got the chance, he recalled her.
immediately
Yeah,
he
he
recalled her as
So
ambassador.
that's the story of Miss Jinnah.
Yes, and that's how she was a very successful ambassador, but because she refused to take the stage and denigrate Miss Jinnah, Ayub was very.
If I may add something from a man's point of view, you know, when people are working to gain something, they are very united. Once you get it, people start to fight over the share. As long as the struggle for Pakistan was continuing, these two ladies, Ms. Jinnah and Begum Liaquat, were united. Once Pakistan was made, there became the jealousy of who's more important.
Who's more important?
So it was not a very acrimonious, but it was not a very close relationship
also.
either. Sorry,
Ma'am,
can
the
you
mic.
give her the mic?
Mankind in general.
Comment, not at the expense of sounding gender biased, I can be related to mankind in general.
Yes,
As soon as human
that's what I
beings-
said. I wanted to make this comment as a man. Okay,
yes,
it's related to
I would
mankind
make
in
it,
general.
the comment as a human being, that as human beings, once they get what they have, irrespective of their gender, then they start squabbling
Gender.
as to who is to
Exactly.
lead.
Both men and women.
Yes, you're right. Good observation. Thank you.
More comments, questions? Yes.
So I wanted to follow up on what you said about APWA being a purely volunteer organization. That is not unique during that period. All across the globe, you had this phenomenon where women didn't have direct power, and it was derived power. And the way that they operated was by providing volunteer service. I still work for one, which is a 96-year-old organization based in Washington, D.C. I've been the elected president for 7 years. I do not get compensated. I work like a CEO there.
Yes.
So there you go.
There you go.
Some things never change.
Yes, excellent. Excellent.
Great.
More?
Spirit of volunteerism.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Would you like to shed some light from a granddaughter's perspective of how your interactions with your grandmother at home, how she was?
I'm
To
sorry,
shed
I
some
didn't
light
hear that.
from your grandfather's perspective, whom you never
Or being a
knew.
granddaughter, how she was? Yeah.
About my grandfather?
No. Let me just
Yes,
repeat
yes.
the question.
Sorry,
So,
yes.
as a granddaughter to the Begum Saiba, how were your experiences, maybe personal or like?
Oh, yes, okay. Well, I mean, of course, there was all the APWA work going on, but she was also a lot of fun to be with. She could play the piano, she could play the guitar. She had a very good singing voice, she could sing. She was always doing the crossword every morning, and she played Scrabble, yes, and she organized us some good birthday parties. We were spoilt once or privileged once to have a birthday party at the governor's house. And we were, I think, just about 12 or 13 years old, and I had my girlfriends from school, and this movie was shown, Murder on the Orient Express, and we just thought it was the biggest thrill in the world to be at the governor's house watching this movie. At the same time, she was pretty strict, because once I was stuck at tuitions, and I had no way to get home, and I called up my grandmother and I asked her for a car, and she said, I'm sorry, you must have misunderstood. Even though your name is Rana Liaquat Ali Khan, the car is only for the governor, and you are not the governor. So please arrange your own transport. So,
As I said, she was a total professional when she was in that capacity.
yes. So, yes, we have very fond memories also of being with Dadi Amma. She herself loved culture. She loved visiting other countries. When she went to China, I remember it was a visit, an invitation, and I think that was 1979. She came back with all these stories because we didn't know many people who used to go to China in those days. I mean, these days everybody's off to China, but very few people used to. So we were even surprised to hear that soup was the last thing served in the long banquet. The last dish was soup. But she used to pick up on all these things. A visit to Russia, she went to like the theaters, the art museums. She was very fond of art, culture. She was very well read. She could speak on many subjects and topics. She was very entertaining. She was very witty. She was actually a close personal friend of Queen Juliana in the Netherlands when she was the ambassador there. They used to actually meet very often on a personal level and play bridge together. So she was, quite charming and witty. So, yeah, thank you.
I remember Princess Ashraf Pahlavi. She came to visit her.
Yes.
Mrs. Bandaranaik. These were not official visits. They came just to visit her when she was governor. And the King and Queen of Malaysia. And I remember the banquet for the King and Queen of Malaysia. I asked her, shouldn't we invite Ashraf and Akbar, her children? And she said, why? Are they top bureaucrats? Do they hold a government job? Are they diplomats? You follow your protocol list.
More? Yeah.
Oh,
Because,
I'm not aware of this.
There were some ambassadors whose wives' names were.
I'll have to look this up.
Yes, the tulip that was
I shall
Rana,
research this.
this we have not found anywhere.
That means there's one named after me then.
There was an ambassador, Mrs. Lalsha Bukhari, who was my aunt, and her name
Yes.
was Naseem, and there was a tulip named after her when she was ambassador.
Oh, how lovely.
So there, and she worked for Appa.
Yes.
She was one of the
Oh,
stalwarts
yes.
here.
Yes. Yes.
One of the founding
Yeah.
members.
All right.
But do look into it.
I'll look into that.
Yes.
Yes, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, but the home in Delhi is still called Gule Rana. Our ambassador's residence is still got Gule Rana written on the gate.
Yes, because
Even
that was
though-
donated to the government of
Yeah,
Pakistan.
but it belonged to them. And he gifted it to her at the time of marriage. So we don't know about the flower, but we know about the big palatial bungalow.
But we must look up the flower also.
We have time for one more question or one more comment. Up there, yes. There was you already asked her, and there was a question up there. I'm sorry.
I'm going to ask a very practical question, but from a completely woman's point of view. She used to wear these lovely hararas. How practical, and she used to be rushing about a lot too.
Yes.
So I would like to know how did she manage to look so collected and so fancy all the time?
May I answer that?
Maybe her granddaughter could tell us.
She picked up the gharara when she was studying and teaching in Lucknow. My mother used to wear the same clothes, and they managed beautifully well. It was,
Yes.
at that time, most every lady wore them of standing, and even the lower classes, and they managed very well.
It's
I
actually
didn't
easier.
see any problem occur at
No.
any time.
It's easier to wear a garara than a sari, I think, actually, because
Actually,
it's just a skirt and a shirt over it. But she was always very well dressed and very well turned out at all times. She was very elegant.
Actually, people may not know that she never went back to her hometown after she left in 47. That's Almora. But she did go to in Delhi a few times because she had her sisters living there. Yes. And they often had to prepare her gararas there, the traditional way, and then send them to Karachi. So when she was going to the UN to get her Human Rights Award, they made a very special one with UN colors or something, and send it to her.
Brocade,
Yes, and so she was very particular about that dress, and she never gave it up, and it was the only dress she wore.
Yes.
I think at home she probably wore shalwar kameez when she was resting.
She never did. She
Even
would
at rest.
only wear kaftan otherwise.
Kaftans. So there was the garara and the kaftan. Okay.
Yes.
So she never wore a sari actually. Also, I think very occasionally.
She used to wear saris
Occasionally.
before she married Liaquat Ali Khan.
That's when she was still
A student, yes.
We have to close. Thank you, panelists.